minutes.
Thank you, I very much welcome that the climate emergency has been immediately put back on the agenda of this House in the first week of the resumption. It is only right that we have the opportunity to address the need for urgent actions, given the range both of important climate events taking place in the coming weeks and given the range of disturbing news and announcements that occurred over the recess. In August, the IPCC released a new special report, hot on the heels of the report a year previously, showing the devastating effect of climate emergency on land and food systems. Also last month, the National Parks and Wildlife Service highlighted that 85% of Irish habitats are in an unfavourable condition. The situation is only deteriorating, and we also need to be clear that it is developing countries that are suffering the worst impacts. Compounding decades or centuries of economic injustice, we are now layering climate injustice on top of the global south as well. Ireland must finally take collective responsibility for its polluting emissions. Thanks to the Citizens' Assembly and the work of the Joint Committee on Climate Action, the Government have at last started to take the issue seriously with a new climate plan. But the reality is, at this late stage, slow incremental progress is not enough. It is an urgent, in fact, it is an emergency. It is particularly disturbing that Fine Gael are not only failing to live up to the deadlines of the recommendations in the Oireachtas Committee report, those deadlines seemingly have been dismissed, in fact, but they do not even feature in the Government's climate plan, despite Fine Gael as the Government party expressly committing to those in the committee in March. On the plus side, outside of this chamber, the mandate for greater climate ambition is clearer than ever. We learned last week in a new Eurobarometer poll that 95% of Irish people consider climate change to be a serious issue, with similar levels of support for greater action in renewables and energy efficiency and other climate-related objectives. Another sign of hope is tomorrow's schools' strike for climate, which of course are linked with the events in New York and elsewhere over the coming week. I know in my own constituency, schools will be out. I've joined them in Maynooth, Selbridge, Naas and elsewhere. My own daughter was on the strikes at her own school, and I know that across the country and across the world, these are only gathering momentum with each passing week, and I salute all those involved at the picket lines, as it were. The question that I want to ask the Minister, though, is how is the Government going to respond right now? Not with reviews, not with potential measures in a few years' time, but in the here and now. Because my fear is that, as happened in March with the last wave of attention, last wave of school strikes, the Government may patronise young people, may congratulate them for their engagement, tell them the Government is going to listen, and then talk up how young people can respond by turning off lights or buying paper straws or patronising advice such as that. There will be also much focus on the Youth Assembly that has taken place in the Dáil in November. That is a significant and welcome move. Having that assembly will focus public attention, and young people will be able to present their ideas to officials. I sincerely hope they get a good hearing. It will be an important day for the Dáil, and it will be an important day for the young people involved. But we cannot have a situation that is the only concrete measure taken in these houses in the coming months. Because, as the House knows well, Ireland's emissions are continuing to rise, our 2030 targets are at risk, and town hall promotional events are not going to reduce them. It is a particular concern. I put it to the Taoiseach, I think it was a year ago, almost to the day, about provisioning for potential fines for missing our climate targets again, for missing our emissions targets, and he glibly dismissed it by telling me we wouldn't make provision in that year, we'd make provision in the following budgetary year. This is symptomatic of government's attitude, or at least has been in the recent past, and frankly it's not good enough. I'm aware the Government will also make pledges at the UN Climate Action Summit next week to support youth and public participation. But let's be honest, the problem hasn't been a lack of participation by young people, or even a lack of communication. The problem has been the Government knowingly neglected Ireland's climate responsibilities for the best part of the last decade. I watched with amusement and enjoyment Greta Thunberg's testimony at the US hearings yesterday. I watched as she deftly dismissed some whataboutery. One of the, I'm not sure it was a congressman or senator that was hearing the evidence, was throwing the usual canards at her about what if and China pollutes and everyone else pollutes. And I watched with great dexterity as she batted it aside and said, you get your own house in order first and worry about everybody else. They can take care of themselves, or you can show example. And I 100% agree. It goes back to the old expression about looking after the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves. Somebody else's inaction is no excuse for anyone else's. We have to mind our own house, and we can do that. And we have a responsibility in this chamber to do all we can to make that happen. And I suppose most importantly from what Greta Thunberg said is that we want science to be heard. So I would ask the Minister, will he be responding to the science, and will the Government be making any substantive commitments to reduce emissions at the Climate Action Summit next week. Because the current approach of announcements and reviews and business as usual is not enough. It's not a response to the climate, biodiversity, global warming and related crises. The UN Summit is also an opportunity for the Government to chart a new course and respond substantially to young people's calls for real action to tackle this emergency. The Government should commit to supporting the European Commission's proposal that the EU increase its 2030 targets to a reduction of at least 55%. And while it is welcome that the Government has supported an EU commitment to climate neutrality by 2050, the Government must commit to enacting the necessary legislation to introduce this target at national level with attendant accountability checks, and I would urge that be done before the next election. Let's get it done now. Why wait? Looking at air quality, when it comes to measures that would both reduce emissions and improve public health, particularly for younger generations, we need look no further than the area of air pollution, which results in over 1,000 deaths in Ireland each year. The Government has seemingly put legal risks ahead of young people's health and failed to introduce a nationwide ban on smoky coal. We still have no sight of the National Clean Air Strategy, and the number of asthma cases continues to increase. I would ask the Minister to clarify steps he is taking this month, including his references to work with the Attorney-General to ban smoky coal, and put the strategy in place and put the position on record so we can begin to move into improvements there this year. I've mentioned biodiversity, and a Fianna Fáil motion at the start of the summer, which enjoyed cross-party support, saw this House declare a climate and biodiversity emergency. I don't want to wade into the beef crisis and farming issues any more than I have to, but I will say that I think the proliferation of wild spaces and increased biodiversity has to be one of the solutions to this issue. And I would suggest that the likes of a REP scheme, which was in place in the past, where farmers were encouraged and rewarded and there was financial incentive to take environmentally sustainable initiatives on the land with supports and advice from the relevant agencies, may be worth exploring in that regard. On the same theme, on agriculture, the Mercosur deal, government, including state bodies, must be a leader in climate change and must seek to empower businesses and individuals. But what we have seen is a government that follows. In July, Fianna Fáil and other parties and members in this House called on the government to rethink its approach to Mercosur. Given the disastrous effects of deforestation, given the huge upheaval and climate change effects of huge commodities being transported from pastures and grazing lands in South America across the globe into Europe, not only the cost of the air miles associated, the 5-mile route says we should consume from within 5 miles of our own plate where it was consumed, never mind 5,000 miles, but also the devastating effects on the rainforest, which have only been doubled down since with all the fires and the Amazon, etc. The government ignored that advice, dismissed it as usual, but it's only when European leaders and others made noise that the Taoiseach finally listened to those rather than listen to this House and mentioned he would consider that in the context of the Mercosur deal. Listen to others outside of here. We had the retrofitting fiasco. I'm sure every member of this House had reps on the retrofitting fiasco where people signed up to the Sensible scheme where homeowners are encouraged to apply for a grant to retrofit houses, and there was a backlog of applications, all predicated on the scheme, and the scheme fell apart and funding was withdrawn in the middle of it. Thankfully, I think it's been restored since, but it was a complete fiasco which did undermine confidence in the government's approach to this and many other issues. We've also, I'm sure in all our constituencies, have seen fiascos such as the school bus fiasco, where we have multiple children trying to get onto buses, trying to be squeezed out, and the department and the government's response again has been to squeeze the system and try to squeeze it back and pare it back and use an accountant's rule to reduce the number of children travelling on school buses, when in actual fact, in the middle of a climate emergency, what we should be doing is encouraging people, actually broadening the system and saying this is exactly how you should be travelling to school. Leave the car at home. The bus is actually being widened, it's been increased, it's being opened up. There's more places rather than using the accountant's rule to actually try and squeeze it back. It makes no sense. And on the same theme, public transport, representing a commuter constituency of Kildare North as I do, I've seen, I suppose, firsthand the government's inaction where people are trying to clamber onto rail carriages, trying to get into car parks at the stations, unable to do so. And we learned recently that the next fleet of rail carriages are due in 5 years' time. We've got to wait another 5 years after raising this in the House consistently and being told by Minister Ross that something would happen sometime. We now learn that 5 years' time we may get new rail carriages. If the government was serious about public transport, if the government was serious about climate change, they would be an immediate order, and they would actually be arriving by now. There could have been an order at the start of this term, even of this government. It didn't happen. We know that we are waiting. I don't know the decision. I don't know whether it's come in, but the government, as it stands, are in the dock, literally, down in the forecourts for inaction on climate change, where the mitigation plan is being put through the shredder by a team of council. I don't know the outcome. It may have been announced while I've been speaking, but the fact that there was a stateable case, the fact that the government, that the climate groups actually could put a stateable case to the High Court and take the government to court for lack of action on climate change, speaks volumes about the approach. I really hope we will see a difference. I look forward to the rest of the debate. I look forward to hopefully actions rather than words, because we are at an emergency stage. We do need to see a lot more than lip service, and certainly my party won't be found watching in terms of what we can do to show us to the wheel. But the government in the driving seat, they need to get on board. They need to make it happen. Thank you.